Welcome back again, and it's great to see that our group is getting even larger. So something magic is going on here. So, and because I'm afraid to stumble upon my words and my thoughts by introducing Annett now, I'm going to read something that I wrote yesterday while preparing this session, and because we had a little swap, so I'm going to improvise a little bit, but okay. There's much that can and probably should be said about Annett, but rather than reading your long publication list, which is nevertheless worth looking at, as it covers a wide range of topics and reflects Annett's unchained mind, it really is, I would like to take this opportunity now, here, as we are all together, to say thank to you. Over the past 4 years, while working together on our great tour project, and I'm getting a little bit sentimental now, we have spent a lot of time working, thinking, and laughing together, often going beyond our limits. And I have to say, Annett has the ability to develop pioneering ideas and turn them into great projects by great effort. And the fact that we are all together on this beautiful island in the middle of a lot of water and storm, which is great, is actually one result of her great passion and energy. She's a real marathon runner, after all. So Annett, I would like to thank you for 4 years of inspiring collaboration. It has been a pleasure to ride with you the big wave of Tagin research and Torah Scrolls. So we are just jumping to our main subject within the project, namely Torah Scrolls. And despite stressful times and bureaucratic madness you mostly faced, because German bureaucracy is sheer madness, I can tell you, and Annett can even tell you more, maybe after more than 3 hours. Polish, French. So we have like a battle here going on between different kinds of madness. So, because, okay, nevertheless, despite all this madness and obstacles, and it was nevertheless a wonderful time, and I really, really hope, fingers crossed, that our journey somehow will continue. We'll see on which wave we are going to surf. So, and because of flowers are not so appropriate to deliver right now, because we are on travel, we thought, because Annett, we really love the Rhodian honey. So my host at the hotel, she recommended me a little store in the old city, so we went there today morning to get the Rhodian honey. So because Annett is so sweet. Thank you.
We have to say our project will end in 2 months, so we are kind of. Dankeschön. Oh wow. So I'm a little more emotional, sorry. So I hope you are not too tired to dive into our favorite.
Just set the camera, because they just see
our
scarf.
Okay. Yes, but it's
nice.
It's nice, just so yeah. They have to maybe no, it's okay. I think no. So I would like to dive together with you in the wonderful Torah Scroll, which I had the opportunity to look at in Buenos Aires, in the Holocaust Museum in Buenos Aires. And for the sake of simplicity, I will refer to it from now on as Rhodes Scroll or Rhodos Scroll, something so, because it's just And in this presentation, I would like to discuss the challenges and possibilities of dating Torah scrolls in general and our Rhodes Scroll or Other Scroll in particular. So, looking at the material features of Torah scrolls, one notices the scribe's serious endeavor to avoid any changes. The nature of parchment, the composition of ink, the script, the shape of the letters have undergone some changes since late antiquity. However, in contrast to the submission of the Hebrew Bible or the Megillot, as we saw, scribes have successfully resisted. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. yes, it's okay. Successfully resisted. Sorry, it's now I lost my. The temptation of book artistry from surrounding cultures, such as magnificent illuminations or artistic calligraphy, always reflecting a particular regional tradition and artistic period. The uniform appearance of ritually pure Torah scrolls and their anachronistic method of production have contributed significantly and continue to do so today to the creation and maintenance of a sense of safety, community, and religious identity in Jewish societies, even across large geographical distances. But for us as manuscript researchers, this appearance of the scrolls, which seems detached from time and space and place, presents a huge challenge. Most of the datings of Torah scrolls provided in library catalogues have been estimated without the aid of material analysis, which means that they should be treated with some caution. With regard to our Rhodes Scroll, we had to deal with another unusual circumstance. The age of the manuscript has been determined twice by carbon-14 analysis. The results of these measurements, however, lie about 450 years apart. In 2001, a laboratory in Buenos Aires settled on the year 1210 with error tolerance of 110 years. It is 1100 to 1320, which is already a large time span. And last year, the Kurt Engelhorn Center of Archaeometry in Mannheim, Germany, conducted a new analysis of a piece of parchment from the scroll that I was allowed to take with me from Buenos Aires, with the result that it most likely dates from between 1533 and 1636. In my presentation, I do not want to delve into the details of probability theory and the pitfalls and limitations of materials research. I lack the expertise to do so. Instead, I would rather attempt to approach the genesis of this Torah scroll using conventional methods of codicology and of yet rather unconventional methods of paleography. To this end, the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, which we were quite obsessed in our project, of this manuscript will serve as central arguments for a dating that makes the accuracy of one of the two C14 measurements appear more plausible. So let us examine and go step by step into the characteristics of a Torah scroll that may lead us to the place and the time of its genesis. A closer look at the writing material allows us to exclude Ashkenazi region as the place of origin. The relatively dark material is gewil, more comparable to leather, differing from the parchment used in the Ashkenazi cultural area in its methods of production. Gewil is much closer to the Talmudic ideas of a kosher writing material, and we will learn more about it later from Anne-May. The notion of pauses only took on a consistent form in the 12th century with the religious authority of Moses Maimonides. Maimonides referred to the famous Aleppo Codex, a 10th century Bible manuscript with Masoretic commentary, which is considered the most reliable source in biblical research for the biblical text and vocalization and the Masoretic apparatus, and maybe also the cantillation, but I'm not sure about this. Maimonides' rules quickly became a standard in Sepharad and in the North African cultural area. And in the course of the 14th century, they also gained more and more influence in the Jewish communities of Christian Europe. According to Maimonides, the open section called Petucha is defined as a space that extends beyond the line and continues on to the next line with a total width of 9 letters. If the space at the end of the line is too small, the entire line must be left blank. A closed pause, stoma, is located within a line and, according to Maimonides, should be 9 letters wide. The scribe of our Rhodes Scroll adheres to this Maimonidean rule and, at least in my spot checks, shows no variations from the Maimonidean specification in terms of the number and placement of the pauses, of these pauses. The presentation of the Song of Sea also follows Maimonides, who specified: the Song of the Sea is written in 30 lines. The first line is normal, while the rest are as follows. One line has an empty space in the middle, while the next line has 2 empty spaces, so that the line is divided into 3, and so that there is a space opposite a writing part and writing opposite each space. Unfortunately, we cannot verify the representation of the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32, as our Rhodes Scroll only contains the biblical text up to Numbers 8:25 in readable condition. The end is severely damaged and certainly contains only a few chapters of Numbers, so Deuteronomy is missing entirely. So what we can say at this point is that our scribe was most likely familiar with the explanations of Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, and this halachic work was written between 1170 and 1180 in Fustat, ancient Cairo, and quickly established itself in North Africa, especially in Egypt and the Maghreb, and the authoritative code in Jewish law. In Spain, the work reached the rabbinical and intellectual circles of Catalonia and Aragon somewhat later, approximately at the beginning of the 13th century. So let's jump into the beginning of the columns. There is a non-binding tradition according to which 6 columns of a Torah scroll should begin with a specific word. For this phenomenon, the mnemonic Beyashemor, an acronym formed of the first letters of all 6 words, has been handed down to us. Interestingly, there are regional variations. While Beit always stands for Bereshit in the beginning, Hey for Habaim, and Vav for the word Ve'aidah, Yud could be assigned to the initial letter of the word Yehuda, or in Oriental tradition to the word Yoduka, they praise you, in the same verse. The Shin was considered in Ashkenazi and Sephardic scribal circles to be the first letter of the word Shemor, but in the Oriental cultural sphere for the word Shoftim, judges, and the Mem in Ashkenazi and Sephardic regions for Matovu, or in Oriental cultural sphere for Motza. Our Rhodes Scroll follows the Sephardic and Ashkenazic tradition with Bereshit, Habaim, Yehuda, Shemor. We cannot verify the last 2 words because, as already mentioned, the scroll is incomplete. Finally, an analysis of the script which clearly speaks as a Sephardic dialect. As you can see, as I put some examples from other cultural regions, ruled out its origin in Middle East, Yemen, and probably also North Africa. The fact that the neck of the lamed is without a little flag, or that the tail of the previous letter can be seen under the yud, is unfortunately not, as Rabbi David Rue at the homepage of the Jewish Museum here in Rhodes wrote, explains, an indication for the manuscript's very old age. This phenomenon can still be found in Sephardic Torah manuscripts from the 16th and even the 18th century. Similarly, the number of lines, our scroll has 45 lines, was standardized only at later stages. Therefore, we can assume that the scribe of our Rhodes scroll follows a Sephardic writing tradition that was established on the Iberian Peninsula in the 13th century and based on Maimonides guidelines, and has continued in the Sephardic diaspora. With regard to dating, however, we are still between our 2 C14 measurements between 1300 and 1700. So we're still at the beginning. I would like to propose a method that has not yet been used to further narrow down the age of the scroll, namely by means of an analysis of the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. So it's like an experiment. It is a paleographic characteristic of the Jewish scriptural tradition that some letters of the highly standardized square script of the scrolls are decorated with crowns, Tagin, or are written in an unusual way, Otiyyot Meshunnot. The Talmud specifies the 7 letters Gimel, Zayin, Tet, Ayin, Nun, Tzad, Shin for these unusual decorations. However, medieval manuscripts from the 12th to the 16th centuries, there are some later examples, especially in Megillot, I've seen something, show numerous acceptations of this ancient restriction, as well as a remarkable wealth of new ornate forms. Ashkenazi and Sephardic legal scholars regarded the unusual curls, arcs, flags, dashes as a threat to the authentic script of liturgical scrolls and insisted on uniformity. But even the early medieval set of rules known as Sefer Tagin, the Book of Crown, which has widely accepted in scribal circles and provided copyists with a precise list of words and letters for such modification, could not dampen the enthusiasm for this letter decoration. A growing number of treatises on the correct forms of the letters and crowns, and not least the medieval artifacts themselves, bear witness to the unbroken heyday of this phenomenon, which could only be standardized from the 16th century on. Parallel to this unusual writing practice, a rich exegetical tradition developed that interpreted the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot as well as the letter forms from rabbinical, mystical or philosophical perspectives. So the variations in form and placement, and eventually the canonization of Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, can be observed over a period of about 500 years. In scrolls, in halachic works, regulating this paleographic tradition, but also in biblical codices, which probably served as templates for scribes. In the following, I would like to take a closer look at the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot of our Rhodes scroll, and on the one hand compare them with other Sephardic Torah scrolls from the Middle Ages and early modern period. On the other hand, I want to open the discussion to scribal literature with Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. So, first of all, it should be noted that our Rhodes scroll has Tagin on the Shatnez guts, which are, as you remember, the 7 letters already specified in the Talmud, Gimel, Zayin, Tet, Ein, Nun, Tzade, Shin. So, as you here can see, with the small strokes. Apart from these regular Tagin, the letters Beit, Dalet, Kuf, Chet, Yud, Hei, Bedek, Chaya are marked with a single crown throughout the entire scroll, except the Yud. This is a writing custom often found in Sephardic scrolls. I have not found any Tagin in the entire scroll that exceed this set of letters, so the Shatnez Guts and this Bedek Chaya. And this was a surprise to me, and I will tell you why in a moment. If you look at other Sephardic scrolls from the Middle Ages, this is a remarkable finding. Take, for example, the Parma manuscript 3295, which dates back to the 13th, 14th century. As we can see, all Shatnez guts are crowned with 3 short, fine strokes. The head always has a small tag. However, the manuscript also displays a great variety of unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. What can be easily observed here is that the scribe wrote these special Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot directly while copying the text, whereas the regular Tagin were added later by another scribe. This could be a kind of master scribe who directly applied his knowledge of the correct placement, number and form of the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, while a student perhaps then had to carry out the rather monotonous decoration with the rule-based Tagin. However, it may also be that the regular Tagin were added at a much later point of time. So I framed a very good example. So you can see this is probably made by the main scribe, and this was added later. So here you can also see the forms. This was written.
Is it Nun Sofit?
This is a Nun Sofit.
Yeah.
This is a Kuf with special Tagin made by the original scribe, and I think this little is added later. So it's. But we don't know how much time lies between these 2 scribal works. A quite similar case can be observed in manuscript Parma 6001, a Torah Scroll consisting of sections written by different scribes. In the first and probably oldest parts, estimated to date from the 14th century, a scribe wrote the text including the Otiyyot Meshunnot, which were then supplemented by a later scribe with usual Tagin on the Shatnez guts, even some unusual Tagin on the Bedek Chaya, the Beit Dalet Kuf Chet Yud Hei. And the 2 hands can be easily distinguished, not only by the color of ink, but also by the shape of the Tagin, which the later hand has provided with small heads. And the same case, we cannot say how much time actually elapsed between these 2 scribal works. So these Tagin are made by the original scribe, and these are added at a later point of time. So all this, like regular Tagin added later, yes. Whereas this is for sure made by the original scribe. Another example of particular interest is a Sephardic scroll which was auctioned off to private ownership and was tested by carbon-14 analysis to date from the 13th century. Unfortunately, we do not have any images, but the expert Shlomo Zucker has described the manuscript in detail for Sotheby's. He reports a huge variance of Otiyyot Meshunnot, most of which were added to the original text layer based on the Sefer Tagin I already mentioned. What is exciting here is that a later hand deleted some of these irregular embellishments and added one tag on each of the letters Bedekreya, Beit, Dalet, Kuf, Chet, Yutei, and 3 Tagin on the Shatnetzgatz. Apparently, this scroll was adapted by a scribe to later writing traditions. As a final example, I would like to present the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot of 2 Torah scrolls kept in the University Library of Bologna. First, of course, the famous Rotolo 2, the oldest completely preserved Torah scroll, which has been dated by 2 independent C14 measurements between 1150 and 1225. Researchers believe that it originated in the area of Toulouse, in the region of Catalonia, which is now Provence. We see an early Sephardic script that does not contain any ordinary Tagin, neither on the Shatnetzgatz nor on the Bedekreya. What this scroll does contain in abundance, however, are unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. As you can see, the Tet, all this, with this many Tagin on special letters. In addition to this famous Torah scroll, the library also holds another Sephardic scroll, which has been dated to the 16th century, albeit without C14 analysis. In direct comparison to the Rhodes scroll, you can see that here too there are no unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, but only crowned Shatnetzgatz and Bedekreya, with the small stroke being placed on the left-hand side rather than on the center in the Bologna scroll.
And the beamer is crazy.
Yes, what happened? Wow, the beamer has a migraine or something. Oh no! Ah, that looks funny. New audio, new variations. if it's not moving, then it's okay. I would like to add with regard to Sefarad in the 12th and 15th century that the scribal literature from this period also suggests a frequent use of unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. First and foremost, Maimonides, who, as already mentioned, exerted a considerable influence on Sephardic and subsequently Ashkenazi scribal culture with his remarks on writing the stam. So the so-called Sifrei Torah, Tfilin, and Mezuzot. I don't like this, but yeah, okay. In his Mishnah Torah, we read, one must take special care with the enlarged letters, the miniaturized letters, the letters with dots over them, and the unusual shaped letters, such as the bent over P's, the crooked letters, as the scribes have copied one from the other. One must also take care with the crowns on the letters and their number. Some crowned letters have 1, others have as many as 7. Maimonides does not refer to the unusual Tagin and Otiyyot and special letters forms as something special, but as a common writing practice. The same applies to Menachem ben Solomon Meiri, who was active in Perpignan in the second half of the 13th century, which was still under Spanish rule at this time. In his manual Kiryat Sefer, he summarized the rules for writing a Torah scroll. In the foreword, he complained about the large number of different opinions regarding the ideal typeface of a Torah scroll. A certain wild growth in letters, form and decoration was a particular thorn in the scholar's side, so he decided to explain the correct execution of the varied letters decoration in a separate section in an own chapter. He speaks of malformed one, Zurara'a, wrapped, lefofot, curved, akumot, crowned, menutzarot, rounded, meugalot, extended, diftiot, pushed away, dechuyot, suspended, teluyot, and so on letters, and explains their appearance. Here we get a tangible idea of the richness of forms in this time. Meiri does not write about a few oddities of Jewish writing practice, but rather about an established tradition that in terms of shapes has clearly spiraled out of control. So now we come to this image. Furthermore, I would like to mention that 6 of the 12 textual witnesses of the Sefer Tagin, the Book of Crowns, are of Sephardic origin. They date from the 12th to the 15th century. The Sefer Tagin, as I mentioned already, is the most important source, or one of the most important sources, of medieval scribes for the correct placement of these crowns and unusual letters. So let me emphasize at this point that the crowned bedek chaya, which dominate in our Rhodes scroll, are not mentioned in the Sefer Tagin, nor in any other halachic work or scribe's manual of the time. They also do not appear in Sephardic Bible codices. Usually a Bible manuscript does not contain Tagin, Otiyyot, Meshunnot, but there, especially in this time from the 12th to the 15th century, are quite a large number of medieval manuscripts, Bible manuscripts. I have compiled about 100, nearly 100, and there are certainly more, that are decorated with these unusual letters as templates for Torah scribes. Fortunately, many of these manuscripts can be dated based on colophons and similar entries. I would like to show you, I don't know what happened. Yes, I would like to show you an example from Sefarat. This beautifully illuminated Bible manuscript with calendar calculation was written in Tudela in 1306. You can see the biblical text with the Masoretic commentary on the left, a little part of the Masoretic commentary, and and inserted by another hand with red ink, Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. Some P-lefufim and Tet-lefufim were already inserted by the original scribe, such as the wrapped Tet in Kitov, or the two Tagin on the Ayin, which has been given a curled, something like a curled tail, like this. And also there is another two flags on the Lamed. But it was the scribe with the red ink who added hundreds upon hundreds of unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, some of which he placed in the margin, probably to avoid impairing the legibility of the text. The red ink of the Tagin and other entries, such as the remark Hadam Betuchot, is very similar to the red used in the holiday tables at the beginning of the manuscript. Not only for this reason do researchers believe that these entries were not written much later than the original text, probably in the 14th century. The scribe's enthusiasm for these smallest elements of writing was fueled by parallel exegetical tradition. In the introduction to his commentary on the Pentateuch, Moses ben Nachman, one of the most influential Sephardic scholars of the 13th century, speculates on the origins of the books of Moses and the circumstances surrounding their first written form. He teaches that Moses received a pre-existing Torah from God, which was burned with letters, I quote, of black fire and white fire. Here Moses appears as a kind of prototype of a scribe who, I quote, copies and writes like a sofer from a primordial Torah. In addition to the Torah, Moses was also initiated into the deep secrets of creation, which are inscribed in the shapes and decorations of the script. According to Nachmanides, a gifted exegete can trace the hidden essence of the divine by interpreting the clues inherent in the written characters, namely, I quote, the form of the letters, whether they have been altered in their form according to the law, or in their curves, halefufot, and bends, ha'akumot, in the thorns of the letters and their crowns. Beketreihen, ha'otiyyot, bekotse. The task of every scribe following in Moses' footsteps is to preserve the sacred text in exactly the same form and pass it on to the future generations so that these secrets are not lost. The fruitful relationship between mysticism and scribal tradition is evident in Nachmanides' much quoted preface, and the mysticism of language in Spanish Kabbalah contains many scattered elements from scribal practice, and in turn had an influence on scribal literature from the 14th century onwards. But this is another story. The most famous exegete of the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot is undoubtedly Jacob ben Asher. Jacob was born in Cologne around 1270, and he joined his father, the famous Asher ben Yechil Harosh, on his escape to Spain in the early 14th century. In his commentary on the Pentateuch, the smallest elements of the scripts, the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot, feature prominently. The German-Spanish scholar interpreted the Tagin and specially written letters of hundreds of biblical passages. So I resist the temptation to give more examples, and would like to conclude by asking, is it likely that a Torah scroll from the Iberian Peninsula, perhaps 700 or even 800 years old, does not contain a single example of unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot? We would be dealing with a scribe who, on the one hand, follows Maimonides' guidelines, but on the other, completely dispenses with unusual Tagin and letter forms, thus contradicting the impression given by the halachic regulations and scribal manuals of the region, which suggest a veritable heyday of this paleographic phenomenon. Nor was he enraptured or inspired by the growing wave of exegetical literature that interpreted the Tagin as a vehicle for a deeper knowledge of God and creation already in the early Middle Ages. Instead, we find the letters Beit, Dalet, Kuf, Chet, Yute, Bedek, Chaya decorated with one tag each, a writing tradition that probably originating as a serif, but this is also another story, I will not go deeper into it, did not manifest itself in the writing practice until later, perhaps from the 15th century onwards, and then from the 16th century onwards, completely replaced the unusual Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot. For this reason in particular, I would place carefully the origin of the Rhodes Scroll in the early 16th century, as suggested by the second C14 analysis. In this case, the scroll would not have been written on the Iberian Peninsula, but by a Sephardic scribe in the Ottoman Empire or on Rhodes. One could speculate that the variability of the crowns and unusually written letters was gradually lost after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, as the knowledge of the correct placement in the Bible verses and words, the correct number of unusual Tagin, and the extravagant forms was no longer accessible due by the circumstances of life in a different cultural environment. The uncertain situation of the Ashkenazi and Sephardic communities after the traumatic expulsions throughout Europe and the encounter of different diaspora communities like Ashkenazi, Sephardi, Greek and Turkish may have reinforced the need for a uniform tradition, also with regard to the writing of a Torah scroll. In fact, from the 16th century onwards, not only that the Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot disappear, but exegetes and mystics also see keys to dwell upon them. So the Torah Scroll from Rhodes seems to me to be an example of this trend. Thank you very much. So maybe we need a third measurement, C14 measurement, to find the right solution. Actually, yesterday I've seen this Torah Scroll in the museum, and so it was my impression that the Torah Scroll, which is here preserved in the museum, one of the older one, comes from not from the same scribe, but from the same time, because exactly the same phenomenon. You have the Tagin and Otiyyot on the Shatnez Getz and on the Bedek Chaya. You have there, so I think it's from the 16th century. And the Rhodes Scroll, I hope I did not destroy any legends or 800 years, but I don't, it's just, yeah. So, yeah.
First of all, thank you. Very fascinating. Yesterday at the museum, I also saw. I took a look at the Torah scrolls, and the first thing that was strange for me is that this is the Ashkenazi form of a Torah scroll. It's not this standing cassette which you normally would find in a Sephardic synagogue. So first of all, I'm just curious to know how this tradition of, I would call it Ashkenazi as I know it, Ashkenazi scrolls had gotten to the Sephardic Rhodes.
Which one do you mean? Which were preserved in the synagogue or in the museum?
Yes.
Ah, okay. I haven't seen this.
But this scroll too is, I would define it by its looks as an Ashkenazi scroll. Yes. Because the Sephardic is
not
okay. So
Mizrahim is more.
So this is a classical. Asaf. Asaf. This is a script of an Ashkenazi classical 14th century Ashkenazic scroll, and it differs not only from the script, which is like more majestic, more. It's really a different script. You can distinguish very quickly between the script, Ashkenazic Sephardic script, and also the Leiten parchment is also a sign. So
I was really talking only about the form. I thought that all Sephardic books, rolls, are in this, in this standing form of a cassette that you roll from. But apparently this is new.
No.
I have some more questions if nobody.
Yeah, please.
One of the things that you showed was there was a writing. I think one of the Italian scrolls that has really you have black lines. Yes.
This one?
Yeah, the Bologna one. It really has black markings for the writing, and you see that that this is called talui. Yeah. This is hanging. All the letters are hanging from the top of the line downwards. Is this a typical? Can you tell if it's talui or if it's omed? What time or what place it was written?
Not really. I don't think that there's any research of it, but what like scholars, manuscript researchers like Beit Aryeh, Malachi Beit Aryeh, they looked at it and said, okay, especially in Christian Europe, letters sometimes were written on top of a line.
Omed,
Yes, Omed, and this Talui, it's more in the Sephardic, so this is the only thing, but it's also interesting.
And the Rhodes book, the Rhodes Scroll, which Which
Let
one?
us see. It's also hanging.
It's Talui.
Yeah, Talui. This is a Parma, Talui, and this is the Rhodes Scroll, Talui. Yeah. And the Ashkenazic we will see at the end. You can't see it, so I'm sorry. Yeah, no.
This is probably both.
But you know what's here interesting? I did not go very deep into it. Here you can see in an Ashkenazic scroll from the 14th century that you have this Bedek Chaya, this Beit, Dalet, Kuf and so, here as small serifs. These are not like Tagin, real Tagins, like you can see it like very strong and bold, but as very, very small scribal special things. Like, so it's something different. And yeah, it would be interesting to see how it comes to be such a common way to embellish a Torah scroll. Yeah, from the 16th century on. Maybe it's an influence from Ashkenazic coming into the Sephardic script. So it's, yeah, we don't know much about it already.
The Ktarim of the letters are already in the Talmud. They are mentioned in the Talmud.
The 7, the Shatnetzgetz.
I know this story about when God gave the Torah to Moshe, he was writing all the Ktarim, and Moshe asked
Tarim, genau.
if he could already give it.
Yeah, maybe Dana later will give a little impression of these stories. Okay, yes. But also in the Sefer Tagin, so the foreword of the Sefer Tagin, they put this tradition of Tagin and Otiyyot Meshunnot very far in the past, almost very close to the revelation. So to sign, like always they try to push it in this, and also this is interpreted as part of the revelation, and so yeah. So thank you very much.